My name is Hannah James, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on lessons in policing, leadership, and sustainability. For those of you who are longstanding attendees of our webinars, welcome back. For those of you who are new to EHN, we are a leading nationwide network of treatment facilities for addiction, trauma, and mental health. We offer inpatient services with centers coast to coast, as well as intensive outpatient and virtual options. For more information, visit our website at www.ehncanada.com. For today's webinar, everyone's camera and microphone are turned off, but please feel free to use the Q&A box to submit your questions for our speaker. We will be sending a follow-up email in the next week that will contain a link to the recording of today's session, as well as access to your CEU certificate. I'm also excited to share that there will be a book giveaway at the end of the presentation. An attendee of today's webinar will be selected at random, and EHN will contact the winner by email afterwards. I'm located in Toronto, which is on the traditional territory of several nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga of the Credit. Our speaker today, Jean-Michel Bla, is located in Bridgewater near Halifax, Nova Scotia. This regional municipality is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. If you are new to this work and want to find whose land you are on or grew up on, please visit www.native-land.ca. Allow me to welcome and introduce today's speaker. Jean-Michel, or JM, Bla has over 31 years of policing experience, having served with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the United Nations, and the Halifax Regional Police, where he retired in April 2019 as Chief of Police. He has 2 degrees in political science and economics from McGill University and in law from Université Laval. He has published several works on international and national related topics and lectured extensively on leadership and modern police management, including mental health and wellness. In 2016, JM gave a TEDx talk on personal and community improvement. In May 2022, JM published a book of memoirs and lessons in leadership and complexity management under the title Working the Blue Lines, Lessons in Leadership from Hockey and Policing. He also contributed a chapter to a collective fictional work titled Less Than Innocent, a Lockdown Story, that was published in the fall of 2022. Upon his retirement from Halifax Regional Police in May 2019, JM began offering his services to first responders, the private sector, and non-for-profit organizations as the principal of Empiric Consultancy Solutions in French and English. Now, without further ado, I will hand the stage over to JM.
Great, thank you very much, Hannah. Just want to make sure that you hear me. Good day, everybody. Merci, bonjour aux participants francophones et bilingues. Je tiens à vous offrir nos excuses. Malheureusement, faute de temps, alors je vais livrer cette présentation uniquement en anglais. Allow me to introduce you to my family. You can see up on the screen here, with the exception of the eldest daughter who lives in Ottawa, who's not on the screen. A huge part of my life for the last 20 years has been officiating minor hockey, in addition to being a senior executive in the policing world. I've lined up to Junior B, but spend the majority of my time doing minor hockey from U18, AA, and below. I've been able to share this with 2 of my children, and the photo on the left, you see my son Jean-Cédric, who's wearing the armbands, and scrunched up in the middle between him and I is my daughter Rebecca, and I'll be talking a bit about Rebecca later on. As I've been an on-ice hockey referee since 2005, it's only been natural for me to integrate policing and hockey into a single book that encapsulated my thoughts around leadership. And as Hannah indicated, there will be a book drawn later on, and this is the book entitled Working the Blue Lines. Over the years of my experience as a senior police leader and a hockey referee, I realized that not only was leadership a critical component of success in the world today, but so is our ability to manage complexity. But leadership begins with us individually, because before we can lead others, we need to be able to lead ourselves. Leading ourselves also means that we understand who we are, what motivates us, and what can cause us challenges, hence the focus on mental health and wellness. Just like those pre-flight airline demonstrations, we shouldn't help anyone else put their mask on until we've put our own on. Once we help ourselves, we can then be in a position to help somebody else. And for me, that's the foundation of leadership. We have to take care of ourselves. As police, military, and first response leaders, and those who want to help them, we've been hearing for years about how we must take care of others. But what about ourselves? And nothing is more determinant in our mental health as our ability to deal with the complexity that the world throws at us. So included in this are three components that we've been looking at today. First one is dealing with the complexity that abounds in our professional and personal lives. Two is dealing with the complexity presented to us by others. And three is dealing with those complex issues that can compromise our ability to take care of ourselves. So this talk is a quick synthesis of the final chapter of my book, Working the Blue Lines, chapter 10, that talks about the lesson of sustainability. And as indicated, a copy will be made available at the end. In the days to follow, EHN will also be sending out a 2-page document I wrote entitled Mental Health Leadership Primer that sums up what I'm going to discuss today. EHN will also be sending out a 1-page bibliography that details some of the books I speak about in this presentation. So without any further ado, let's get started. Even though I'm retired from policing, I'm acutely aware of the challenges facing the profession today. You can say that I still have skin in the game through my daughter, Rebecca. And here are just some of the uniforms that she's worn during her short life thus far. She has been, since the month of June of this year, a police officer with the Halifax Regional Police. Following the murder of George Floyd, my son was apologetic that he didn't see himself as being a police officer, whereas my daughter, Rebecca, had always wanted to be one. And as senior police leaders, our role is to ensure that the generations of officers following us want to be there, stay there, and have the support to properly do their job. And to a certain extent, that's my role with Rebecca. I just want to say a couple of things beforehand. Number one is that I'll be talking a lot about policing, but I'm going to try to talk about first response at the same time. And this isn't exclusively about leadership for police officers. This is leadership for all people, including those people within the first response community. Secondly, just to let you know, I have 2 dogs here, beautiful dogs. They're both geriatrics, 14 and 13. They're sleeping right beside me right now, but they may just wake up if a car goes by. So just to warn you, in case you hear of some pups in the background, you're wondering what that's all about. So what is policing? Policing is dealing with those challenges and complexity that people themselves cannot, would not, or should not deal with. But first, let's look at what constitutes leadership. To begin any discussion about leadership, it's critical to understand what leadership is, and especially what leadership is not. Leadership isn't management. Leadership and management are 2 distinct, although interconnected, activities. Like a 2-strand rope, leadership and management, when combined in proper doses, leads to a balanced approach where there's growth and direction. Something to keep in mind in all this discussion is that leadership without management results in chaos, whereas management without leadership leads to stagnation. So to cut to the chase, leadership, in my mind at least, is influence with purpose. And for that influence to work, we need trust to attain a common good for the good of others. But we have to also understand what influences exist in the world around us that have a direct effect on how we deal with people and the world we live in. We all come to work and to any situation in life with really 4 things. Number 1, our motivations. Number 2, our emotions. Number 3, our perceptions. And number 4, our biases. And when I talk about biases, it's in the largest sense. Yes, they include prejudices, but they also include our preferences and something called cognitive biases. I could give a whole presentation on those, but for those of you who are familiar with them, you'll understand them. They're also called heuristics. They're basically shortcuts that allow us to deal with the information that we have in our society. There are 4 main cases of succeeding in the world we live in today, within the complexity of that world. Number 1 is knowing and understanding the environment in which we live. 2 is knowing and understanding ourselves. 3, knowing and understanding others. And 4, using that knowledge to influence others, hence leadership. So let's take a look at the environment we work and live in. You may have heard of this expression, VUCA. It originated in the 1980s from the US Army War College to describe the world after the collapse of the former Soviet Union. It still aptly describes the world we live in today. Each one of the letters are as follows: volatility, unpredictability or uncertainty, complexity, and asymmetry. What is asymmetry? Well, we assume that things are in their natural state measured, even, and fair. But we know that life isn't any one of those things. As an example, some people get sick early and often in their lives while others don't. Some people win lotteries, and once again, others don't. Some people deal with successive challenges, while others don't. As much as we try to attenuate the effects of asymmetry, we just can't eliminate it. But then again, things have always been volatile, unpredictable, complex, and asymmetrical in the history of humankind. One, because we're dealing with human beings. The difference, though, is that today, more than any other time in the history of humankind, we're dealing with significant advances in technology that have had sweeping effects on our lives. Perhaps the most significant change we've seen since the Industrial Revolution, aside from the advent of the computer, has been the shift from an office-based workspace to a home-based workspace, and now to a hybrid workspace that incorporates a variation of both. This can and has been a huge source of stress for some individuals. Some employees hired in the past 3 years may have never even set foot in their office. Decisions around retirement and careers have and will continue to be based on what happens in the coming months and years around hybrid workspaces and going back to the office. And I know from a personal perspective, my wife recently retired, and a good reason was because of the hybrid work situation. And of course, this is related to two corresponding phenomena. The first one, known as quiet quitting, and that all came from a 17-second clip on TikTok in which an American by the name of Zaid Khan embraces the notion of not going above and beyond at work, causing a lot of noise and striking a chord in people's minds. His video was viewed 4 million times. In his very short, almost disconnected video, remember it's only 17 seconds, he says, your worth as a person is not defined as your labor or otherwise productive output. The second is the whole issue of the Great Resignation. It's an ongoing socioeconomic trend in which employees have voluntarily resigned from their jobs en masse, beginning in early 2021 during the COVID pandemic. People have reassessed their career choice and determined what really engages them and what is truly important, such as family, less work, and more simple lives. One of the things that we've seen, even out here, is the number of Ontarians and people from Quebec who have moved to the Maritimes. What about recruitment? Some of you may be aware of the challenges around recruitment, even recruitment within your respective teams. What have we seen in the last few years, especially in policing? As we've seen Petra robbing Pauline to maintain some degree of staffing levels. Organizations robbing police officers in order to be able to keep their staffing levels up high. We've seen whole services, I'm talking about large services, including the RCMP, my former employer, as well as in Montreal, the Montreal City Police, who have upwards of 10 to 20% attrition levels. And in some cases, in one police service in Eastern Ontario, 46% of their people are off work. You know, it's very much like recruiting blood donors, of which my family were big blood donors. In spite of the high population numbers and the lessening of certain criteria, fewer people, unfortunately, are participating in the process. Part of this challenge is how we within the first responder community frame our work. We really have to put the emphasis on selling the sense of purpose over the sense of adventure to those people who will follow us. Now, because of the tsunami of information thrown our way and the complexity out there, we also have to deal with the most basic human desire for certainty. We do this through predictions and perceived certainties. We see this not only in the economic domain, but also in politics and even in public safety. We must be careful because as human beings, we're way better at something called post-diction, i.e. after the fact, than we are at prediction. Let me give you a good example of this. Somebody for whom I have a great amount of respect is Dr. Darryl Plekas. He's a former UBC professor and the former Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. In 2012, I attended a conference in Quebec City where he gave a series of predictions. Some of them have really come to fruition. The very first prediction that he gave was the following, and I remember because I took notes and I quoted them: crime will drop and will continue to drop substantially, especially frauds and car thefts that will become sunset crimes. Well, I think if you've been following the news, you know that unfortunately that is not the case. The Globe and Mail just recently, back in September, put out an article talking about car thefts reaching national crisis levels, soaring close to 50% higher in Ontario and Quebec due to organized crime activity. As human beings, we search for meaning and trends. These are our cognitive biases coming into place again to understand our world. That results in oversimplification. And during times of great complexity, such as the COVID pandemic, mass shooting events, as we had here in Nova Scotia some 3 years ago, foreign interference and economic upheaval, people have been grasping for that simplicity. And that simplicity can also lead to conspiracy theories. The principles underlying conspiracies are basically simple. Nothing happens by accident. And there is no randomness in life, and we know that is not true. Nothing is as it seems, and everything is linked. And then just one step above conspiracy theories is ideologies. The challenge that predictions, conspiracies, and ideology present to us is, what do we believe in this world today? So I'm just wondering whether or not we could possibly open up the chat, if Benjamin's good enough, because I want to do a non-scientific survey. This is your chance to be able to contribute to the discussion in here. If not, we can just use the Q&A function. But I want to ask 5 simple questions where your answers will be basically numbers, and you'll understand in a moment. Let me ask you 5 related questions about the effects of technology in your lives. And I was wondering if after each question, because unfortunately, I'm not able to see either the Q&A or the chat functions, if Hannah, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a brief summary of what some of the answers are there. So if we're ready, let's go ahead. The first question: how many passwords do you have? I've actually done the list, and I have more than 75 different passwords for 75 different sites, equipment, pieces, doors, what have you. Hannah, what's the group saying?
There are some people saying 100, 4, 6, 5, 50 plus. Too many, at least 15, 25, far too many to count.
Right. And that's pretty well what I thought. I was the other day just listening to 2 gentlemen talking in the gym change room, and one guy was saying that that he counted, he had 52 passwords, and he was just not happy. I guess he didn't like using a common password or not. Regardless, I'm sure it affects everybody. The second question: how many times do you touch your phone every single day? And when I talk about this, not picking up the phone like that, but actually picking it up, and every time that you touch it, to put send a message or to check on an app. Hannah, what are they saying up there?
Okay, we have 50, hundreds, likely over 100. Way too many. A lot, never thought about it, honestly. There's no choice as it's a part of work.
Mm-hmm. And a part of life too. So one study that came from 2018 from the States, this is 2018, so it's 5 years ago, right? States that on average, individuals touch the phones 2,600 times a day. Next question. Talking about our phones, how many different apps do we have on our phone, tablet, or computer?
We have 40, 50, 100, 25, 10, 40, 17, 50, 100.
So the
A
numbers are
lot
going,
have not counted.
yeah. So I've done all the work for you. I've counted on my phone, and I recognize that each person is totally different in terms of their likes, dislikes, and their preferences and their needs, of course. I counted 34 separate apps on my phone. So now let's go to emails. Okay? How many emails do you receive in a day?
See what the chat is saying. 250 to 60, over 100, over 100. Over 100 seems to be popular. 50, 5 to 10, over 100.
And that I can believe total, because I had over a 2-week period back in 2018, I asked my executive assistant to be able to keep track of the number of emails that I received. And she came up with just slightly over 200. And I remember a BlackBerry commercial, you might have seen it, where this young, successful executive said she received 1,000 emails a day holding up her phone. And thanks to BlackBerry, she was able to manage them all. Really? All right, think of it, 1,000 emails. I would go crazy with 200 emails at a time. And then finally, the last question, directly related to emails, communication. How many text messages do you receive and send every single day?
Okay, just waiting for responses here.
No problem.
50-ish, 50, over 200, easily 100, 80, 100, 10, 100 to 200, depending on the day. 15, 20, 30. Someone commented that this question is stressful.
I'm sorry about that.
80.
And it varies, obviously, amongst people. I do remember that at the very beginning of text, SMS messaging, it was back in 2002, 2003, when it was free at the time, because or actually 2000 and beyond, because the telephone companies wanted to get people involved in it. And I was advised by my wife, who was living in Montreal while I was working in Winnipeg, of the 9/11 attacks. I was there. And in the years to follow, ended up getting phones for our 2 daughters, and seeing that they would manage to do 1,800 messages a day. And of course, that's when we started paying for it and realizing that we had to get a bit of control of that. So all to say is that this technology has a huge, huge impact, is involved in our lives. And as somebody earlier on, I think you're absolutely right, said we have to have it, but not just for work, but also for home. So let's take a look at what the internet happens on the internet today during a 60-second period. I don't know if you can see the image on the screen, but just to give you some ideas, they talk about 11,000 fake accounts removed from Facebook every 60 seconds. They talk about Google searches, 2.4 million Google searches in there. Particularly what we're doing here, 6.3 million total Zoom meeting minutes in a 60-second period on the internet. And that has a huge effect on all of us, because we're contributing to this, and we're also getting this information back to us. So as we see, that's a huge societal trend. And what it ends up being, that social media, and if I can just go back, I just want to come back here for a moment here, all right, is one of the reasons why we end up using the internet and social media so much is because it fuels what we can call our own personal threat assessments. We use social media and the internet to determine what the weather will be like, what traffic conditions are, how the markets are acting, the public sentiment of the day, and any other event, regardless of where it may be, that could have an influence on our day. I know a lot of people who on a Monday morning are just going crazy checking out the sports of the weekend. The challenge is that not only does social media amplify our messages, but it also amplifies all messages and creates it all. And the use of social media doesn't cause division so much as it amplifies existing divisions. And it provides a great space for public reprobation, even public shaming. Hans Rowling, the author of the book Factfulness, writes that fears that once kept our ancestors alive today keep journalists employed. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of misinformation, disinformation. I'll get into that in a second. And our continual connection to social media makes us prone to new forms of viral emotional effects. These are not media that are designed for calm reflection. With their constant presence, we have less and less mental space to step back and actually think. We're besieged by emotions and oftentimes needless drama. People simply spend less time with in-person social interactions and more time socializing online, which makes it increasingly difficult to develop empathy and sharpen our social skills. Like any skill, empathy comes through the quality of our attention. If your attention is continually interrupted by the need to look at your smartphone, you're never really gaining a foothold in the feelings or perspective of other people's. You're continually drawn back into yourself, flittering about on the surface of social interactions, never fully engaging. So what ends up being is that our social muscle simply atrophies because we're so involved in social media. Now, the next thing is artificial intelligence. This has been touted as the big game changer in the years to come. Especially in policing, there were concerns back in the 2000s about the legitimacy of digital photography in policing. Now, for example, Adobe has an AI-driven program that lets you create any image, absolutely any image, by simply saying, I want to see this image, and it comes up. So the question is, who or what will write police reports and judicial applications specific to policing? A lawyer recently submitted to a state Supreme Court in the US case law written by AI. Of course, the cases were totally fabulated. How will the advent of AI change how we police and respond to the needs of the community? And more importantly, how will we interact with one another? Social media, the internet, and now AI are a hacker's dream. How many of you received an email from someone claiming to be the administrator of some dead person's estate who wants to give you money? Or having received a text message indicating an Amazon or Costco gift card waiting for you, or a call about an arrest warrant issued by CBSA or CRA. It's not a question of if, but when and how we will become a victim of cybercrime. And with technology, we as people are the weakest link. More specifically, we must avoid being a victim of social engineering, which is essentially the art of manipulating us to divulge important personal information or access to our technology. We always have to take the time to think through any request for our time and approval online. And of course, as the slide indicates, it means that we have to be our own firewall. So who finds us? Or who finds what, rather? In our information-rich, attention-poor society, the issue is not that we go out to find information anymore, but through social engineering, the information actually finds us and then attempts to influence us. Another result is information layered with some truth, but manipulated to arrive at a particular end. It could be fake news, but most likely something known as synthetic news. You've heard the story based on a true story, but everything else is not true. So how can we turn off this world that in effect has no turn off switch? What this can lead to is cognitive depletion or burnout. I'll talk about that soon enough. But first, how do we deal with all these inputs? As I previously mentioned, our reaction to all this information uncertainty is to try to simplify things. And as human beings, we're analog beings. We're not digital beings. And hence there's an inherent incongruity between our biology and today's digital technology. The challenge is to reconcile somehow that incongruous nature that we're dealing with. In addition to all the complexity that's out there, stuff also happens. What to do when this stuff happens? Because it does regularly happen and sometimes with a huge impact. When dealing with the complexity that surrounds us, our challenge is to understand and even swim in that complexity without necessarily drowning in it. We do this by being prepared through mindful planning and preparation, self-regulation, self-discipline, and delayed gratification. So how do we turn off a world that has no turn-off switch? How much time do we spend in front of the screens, phones, computers, TVs? I mean, going through the messages in there, and my apologies for raising your stress level with these questions, but this is a challenge that we have to deal with. What this can lead to is cognitive depletion. It's a source of mental distress that can lead to depression and anxiety, the two most common mental health challenges we face. An untreated mental illness can lead to poor physical health and impaired decision-making. I'm sure all of you know this. From a leadership perspective, we become what is known as the depleted leader. And our psychological well-being matters to those leadership abilities that we have, and hence to those people that we lead. Leaders who suffer from psychological resource depletion are less effective in their leadership role, and that kind of makes sense. And they may even become destructive. And we've heard many stories of individuals who have done very well and then suddenly something happened. It also makes it more difficult for us to walk the talk about mental health if the leader is not healthy. So what are some of the things that we can do to deal with this source of potential distress? Well, it's easier said than done. 4 really quick things that I can think of is 1, to turn it off long before bed and back on long after bed. Now, that may not work for everybody, right? Totally understand that. Try single tasking, one thing at a time. One of the things I used to do was work in 15-minute segments, making sure that I break up my work. If you're a boss, your meeting should be no more than 15 minutes long, as much as people would like to talk. And then read or listen to books to maintain your attention-building focus. Another important consideration is to understand what wellness is and what wellness is not. Wellness is not about feeling good all the time. Occasional depression even has a therapeutic effect to calm us down during times of unusual or exceptional stress. We must be very careful in 3 particular areas of our lives. What we ingest: food, alcohol, drugs. And that includes tobacco, prescription, and recreational drugs. What movements we do and what movements we do not do. Are we sitting continually? Do we have a lack of exercise? And finally, what stressors we subject ourselves to. Not enough or too much sun, screen time, social media, chemicals, work stressors of all types. What we want is to avoid becoming the depleted leader. Our goal is to find our own pool of tranquility to cool off from that burnout. So let's go back to my daughter, Rebecca, and the up-and-coming leaders that are out there. In her first 4 shifts as a police officer, starting in June, she responded to 10 calls, arresting 6 individuals and preparing 4 cases for court. This was a far cry from all the action she was trained for and expected. During her second shift, she even got a boot to the face, hence what you read up there, it says assault PO. And for her, it was almost like a badge of honor. The next night, she had to respond to the urban forest fires that affected Halifax. She had to patrol our old neighborhood to help some of our neighbors in distress. Her response to my text message that night about her having lots of firsts was the following, and it's very telling. Laugh out loud. Yes, lots of firsts for me last night. It was a sad night for the community, but a whole lot of fun for me running around rescuing people from homes, etc. There's that adrenaline hypervigilance kicking in that those of us in the first responder realm are all too familiar with. She had trouble being off the next day, not being on the front lines with her colleagues. I spoke to her at length and convinced her to get into the gym and work out. Someone once wrote regarding policing, and I think this can be applied to first response in general. You get into it to change the world. You get out of it changed by that very world. So let's shift gears here and talk about something very serious, but inevitable. And that's our demise, death. This table was taken from The Economist magazine in 2015. And we can see that, and there hasn't been that much change, we can see the leading causes of death in perspective: heart and circulatory disorders, cancer, and respiratory disorders. The top 4 things that kill people, and that includes all of us on this line here, are number 1, tobacco use and the resulting cancers. Number 2, which apparently has overtaken number 1, is poor or malnutrition, and that includes obesity, starvation. Number 3 is hypertension, and number 4 is air, water, and land pollution. upwards of 9 million deaths worldwide because of that. For the past few years, we've really been, as a society, focused on the COVID pandemic. But during that time, there's been other pandemics that have been coming about. What about the issue of HIV, which, contrary to what a lot of people think, is still unfortunately with us? Dementia, which grows in numbers as we grow older. Overdoses of all types. There were some jurisdictions, states, and provinces that had more people die during the COVID pandemic from overdoses than they had from directly related to COVID. Particular policing and first responders, what kills them? Do you remember the 2018 CBC study talking about the number of individuals who died in police interactions in Canada? They came up with a study and they determined that between 25 and 30 individuals die a year in interactions with police. And those are individuals who are from bank robbers to drug dealers, who are shooting back at the police, to individuals who are having mental health crises, to individuals who die when their vehicle is struck by a police vehicle in an accident. My view is that in Canada, as many, if not more, police officers die by suicide each year than individuals who die in interactions with police. And I know this occurs as well in the realm of firefighting, and especially in the realm of paramedicine. Ask yourself this question for those of you who are in first response. What percentage of police officers and first responders self-medicate regularly by consuming alcohol, anabolic steroids, and now, because it's legal, cannabis? A fair number of individuals do. So we need to be able to have a certain degree of balance in our lives. I'm just looking. But don't forget, you don't have a work life and a home life. You have a life. There's absolutely no advantage to compartmentalization. Life balance is about fulfillment, exercising your talents, attracting and caring for loved ones, and leaving the place a bit better off than when we found it. Life balance is about a healthy distribution of talents utilized at work and at play. To me, that means not a 50-50 equal split, but certainly not a 0-100 or 100-0 either. And a critical part of that life balance is avoiding false purposes in life. What are examples of false purposes? Well, the pursuit of pleasure to the exclusion of everything else. Causes, cults, conspiracies. The dogged pursuit of money and fame. Constant attention seeking, and facilitated most likely by social media. And what I call the 5-pronged trap of cynicism, nihilism, denialism, escapism, and victimhood. So now I've depressed you about the challenges out there. Let's start looking at how we can deal with the complexity that is out there. Let's look at stress. Stress in its most basic form is neutral. Bad stress is distress, while the good stress is eustress. The good stress is what gets us up in the morning. The bad stress is what sometimes forces us to bed. Another portion related to this is around fragility. What is fragile breaks? What is resilient resists? And what is anti-fragile grows? The author Nassim Nicholas Taleb wrote in his book Anti-Fragile about things that actually get better as a result of the stressors that they deal with. So for me, the definition of resilience, the ability to recover from stress, traumatic events, and adverse situations, means that resilience is about the status quo. Whereas what we want is we want to be able to benefit actually from the distress and the eustress that we have to deal with, so as to become anti-fragile. There are 3 elements of mental health, and I'm sure many of you have heard about them. 1 is a sense of control. 2 is a sense of connection to something larger than oneself, whether it be family, service, faith, or community. And 3 is a regular pursuit of challenges. And of course, when you challenge yourself, you are bringing about a bit of distress along with that eustress as well. Now, related to the mental health is the issue of happiness. There are 3 elements of happiness, which is personal growth, contribution to others, and development of deep, significant relationships. What I would suggest is to go after what creates meaning rather than trying to avoid discomfort in one's life. The key is to lead a meaningful life. And the key to the successful management of stress is to see stressors as challenges to be overcome, rather than as threats to our well-being. Consequently, we invite a psychological response that improves thinking while causing less physical wear and tear. So what we want to do is we want to create essentially VUCA 2.0. And the key here is to develop what we qualify as practical intelligence, effective decision-making under intense uncertainty. For VUCA 2.0, first and foremost, we must understand the fundamental task of any leader is to provide a far-reaching vision, to see the global picture, to work for the greater good of the group, and to maintain its unity. That is what people crave for in their leaders. We have to avoid ever seeming petty, self-serving, ideological, or indecisive. We must provide a compelling purpose for our people and especially for ourselves. Particular to our role as first responders, we need to do a better job of promoting the sense of purpose over the sense of adventure. But at the same time, we must see leadership as a dynamic relationship we have with those being led. We have to be able to demonstrate empathy. And that empathy must be visceral. We can feel when members are losing their respect for us. And we can access this only through our humility. And by doing so, we can create a culture of safety and caring, both physical and psychological. But once again, this has to begin with ourselves. We have to be able to manage ourselves, not only tactically, but especially strategically. For those of you who have studied The Art of War by the Sun Tzu, some people call him Sun Tzu, okay? Remember one of the most important lessons from The Art of War, and that is strategists will always prevail over tacticians. Why? Because tacticians or people who fall into tactical hell, okay, end up having to go into that repetitive cycle of problems, and they lose sight of their long-term goals. Stephen Covey once spoke of getting a higher perspective and overseeing the forest instead of walking amongst the trees. So we want to create this VUCA, which allows us, more than anything else, to have clarity in our life. One of the best books I've ever seen as a growing older is this one. As a chief, in fact, I started giving this book out to all those reaching their 50th birthday. It talks about the challenges of surfing, overabundance. It's a known phenomenon that people tend to age more quickly and deteriorate more rapidly right after they retire. Their minds have nothing to feed on. Anxious thoughts return. They become less active. And it encourages us essentially to develop that plan, to be strategic in our lives. So strategic management of the self, as we get close to ending this presentation, comes up with 5 things. And this is only one of 2 slides that really has any writing on them. One is focusing on one thing at a time. Managing the trivia out there. We spoke about the flood of information that comes in there. Cultivating diverse views. The greatest gift that diversity gives us is diversity of thought. Embracing conflict. Understanding that, yeah, sometimes conflict is a very important piece of resolving issues, especially in a democracy. And then embracing the complexity that's out there. And this is really important as we move through the specific stages of our life. In our youth, we have lots of time, abundant energy, and robust health. In our adult life, we finally have some money, and for the most part, the energy and drive to live our life, which includes spending a considerable amount of energy on our careers. Finally, in our old age, we have the time, hopefully the money, but are lacking the area of abundant health and energy. The lessons of this analysis are life is short, and we only have so much energy. And we tend to waste a lot of time in futile searches, changes, and oversimplifications. And we don't benefit from the uncertainties of life. Because the single most important thing is to realize that the currency of life is time. It's not money. We live for immediate pleasure, distracts us from the passions of time. And this is something that we have to be very mindful of. And it's only each one of us individually on our own that can do this. Remember the flexible measuring tape our grandmothers or grandfathers had in their sewing or tailor kits? Imagine one spread out in front of you on the floor of your office, your kitchen, or bedroom, where you are right now. It has 100 inches, so it's over 8 feet long. The average male Canadian will live to 82 years, while the average female will live to 84. Take a look at where you are on that imaginary tape measure on the floor. If you're 53, you're at inch 53. If you're 26, then you're at inch 26. Using a hockey metaphor, a period will last about 28 years in the life of an average Canadian. Are you 28 or younger? Well, you're in the first period of your game of life. Are you between 29 and 56? Well, you're in the second period of your life. Between 57 and 84, you're in the third period. Older than 84, well, you're in overtime, baby. Sudden death overtime. But then again, aren't we all there? Because we never know when our game will end. So let me, as I come to the very end of my presentation, tell you a story about probably the most significant event in my life. The date is January 12th, 2010. The time is 4:53 p.m. This is a meeting, like any other meeting, but it's being held in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. You see, there are a total of 10 people in this room. You only see 9. The photographer constitutes the 10th. And there are 2 women and there are 8 men. On the left is a group of Chinese police generals. And on the right, at the head of the table, is the number 1 of the United Nations mission to Haiti. And to his immediate left is the number 2. The gentleman in the white shirt, his name is Doug Coates. He is a superintendent with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the acting police commissioner. He had replaced me some 9 months previously in that mission. Within seconds of this photo being taken, a 7.2 earthquake hit Haiti, killing every single person in this room. That night I was sent by the Canadian government, along with the disaster assistance recovery team of the Canadian Forces, to recover Doug's and another Canadian police officer's body. This photo was taken as we were pulling Doug Coates' body out of the rubble. This event, as witnessed by this image, more than any other I've lived, has forced me to reconcile the following: the mortality in everyone, including myself, and the importance of embracing all life's pain and adversity as opportunities to grow. This event also provided me with the most noble opportunity I've ever had to influence and lead others. Since the beginning of human consciousness, our awareness of death has absolutely terrified us. It still does. This terror has shaped our beliefs, our religions, our institutions, and so much of our behavior in ways we can't even see or begin to imagine. We humans have become the slaves to our fears, our evasions, and our false purposes. But when we turn this around, becoming more aware of our mortality, we experience a taste of what true freedom is about. The goal is to live that freedom every single day. And this is what this image represents to me. And I recognize how very fortunate I am to have had someone capture the lowest moment of my life, what I qualify as being the nadir of my life. Allow others to see your appreciation of the incredible things available to you in your life, the experiences, the accomplishments, and especially the relationships. Influence them to see what life can be by living yours with purpose. What my wish for you as a leader or a helper, regardless of your formal position and role, is the following. The goal is to develop and maintain clarity in your life. Really, 8 quick points. Exercise. You've heard it before. It's so important. What's good for your bicep is good for your brain. Remember that aerobic exercise adds time to your life, but strength training makes that life worth living. I can't overstate the importance of sleep. There's some very good organizations ready to assist where possible first responders. I think one of the best I know, especially for police and first responders, is a company called Haleo, Haleo. A big shout out to them and the work that they do on a regular basis. Ensuring rational diet, love and making connections through play and laughter. That's a social health. That is so important. That has a direct effect on our attitude. We want to be able to have an expansive attitude and not an attitude that is fearful. Have that one important person in your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be a spouse. It doesn't matter who it is. Have an important person in your life. Seek help as required. We have to break the stigma as much as possible about this. And by asking for help, even just a little bit of help, whether it's with your finances or a lot of help when it comes down to a significant mental health issue, do it. Think of it. If you were to break your leg, you go to the doctors. Why not if you have a problem from a mental health perspective? Seek opportunities outside your comfort zone. And more than anything else is have a purpose in your life. Influence with purpose. So earlier I showed you a photo of my nadir, the lowest point of my life. Now to conclude, allow me to share you the opposite of my nadir, the highest point of my life. I took this photo from the deck of my home earlier this summer with my wife by my side after the fires, which were to the west of us and to the east of us, about 50 kilometers each side, had been finally extinguished. This is the sum of my life. I wish you all the same as you lead your lives with purpose, as you lead yourselves and others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, JM. That was wonderful and so informative. We do have some time for some questions. I encourage everyone to direct any questions that you have into the chat. There's a few here, so we have time for a couple. All right. Okay, so to kick it off, what would be the most important thing for a leader to remember when supporting someone struggling with trauma and mental health?
Remember that it could be them in that position. So the idea is, we've heard of the golden rule, which is so important. But what about the silver rule? I don't know if many people have heard of that. The silver rule basically is do not treat people as you would not have them treat you. So make sure that you take care of somebody as best as you can within the confines of the structure that you have, right? Sometimes you're not able to take care of people. You're not able to deal with things because it may trigger you, for example, if you're having an issue, or it may be something that is contrary to your belief systems, right? It's just seeing a little bit of yourself in that other person as you help them deal with their challenges.
Thank you so much. Okay, how much does stigma prevent those in the policing profession from seeking help?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you get higher up in the hierarchy of policing, it becomes more and more challenging because you get less and less people to whom you can speak. So it's something to recognize that as you climb the ranks, that you have to still be able to speak to people and you have to make yourself available. Stigma also, it's interesting because we've heard about toxic masculinity and how policing is rife with it. But what I find is that it doesn't matter whether you can have women or men, they can still share the same attitudes. And if the leader, and the leader is not just the police chief, but can be the patrol sergeant, can be the watch commander. If the leader doesn't show empathy and understanding, then the people beneath him and who work with him or her won't show it either to the people out in the public. So we have to take care of ourselves, but we also have to take care of our people so that they in turn can take care of other people. So stigma is a real challenge that we've done a really good job, I think, on. It still has some more work to do.
Thank you. And what would be the first step for a first responder to take if they are struggling with their mental health?
One, to recognize what's going on. It doesn't necessarily mean to self-diagnose, right? It just means that, okay, something is amiss in reaching out, right? Very often, if you don't want to reach out to a work colleague, there are a lot of services out today. As much as we like to think there are these services, there are probably more services out today that are available to first responders and other people than there have ever been in the history of policing and first response in the world, I'd have to say. So it's a matter of recognizing, okay, something's not going right, just having discussion. And it's interesting because sometimes, and I've had this in the past with myself, is that by asking somebody something and saying, yeah, I'm not feeling right because of this, and that, it ends up being that they themselves have gone through it as well. And I realize that I'm not alone in this, hence breaking some of that stigma and some of the concerns.
Okay, thank you. Yes, there are definitely many resources available once we finally, raise our hand and have the courage to ask for help and to voice that. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. First and foremost, I just want to thank you, GM, for your extensive history with the honorable work on the front lines and for your leadership. I personally found this presentation informative and thought-provoking and insightful, and I see people in the chat are saying it was absolutely fantastic and send their gratitude as well. Thank you for our attendees for being here and taking the time out of your busy schedule. Again, a reminder, we will be giving away one of JM's books, and we'll be sending you an email to the winner after the presentation.
And
Thank
I'll
you so
sign
much. We're getting his autograph.
All right.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you now. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.